Greetings, and welcome back to the MCOC Encyclopedia. Today is day 1 of covering every champion in the game, and today we'll be looking over the Mutant class. I will be looking at a different class every day this week, so that we cover the entire tier list, ready for December's champions. So let's dive in. I will be going over this list in columns, so starting at 10-10 and then going all the way down to 10-1, then going to 9-10, down to 9-1, 8-10, 8-1, and so on. If you want to find a particular champion, I will also be highlighting the box I'm talking about, so hopefully you should be able to work your way through and find the one you're looking for. This leads us to start then in actually column 9 with the Mutant champions, because there are no mutants that I personally believed warranted a 10 in how often can they be used. We have some exceptional and very versatile champions to work with, but none quite have that 10 level. That leads me then to who I believe is personally the best mutant in the game at the moment, and that is Kitty Pryde, sitting right up at the top in 9-10. She is exceptionally versatile with her phasing on dashing in mechanics as long as you have enough prowess, and that really lets her take a lot of fights that she probably shouldn't be able to. Combine that with her amazing damage, and you have a very, very solid champion. Throw in the fact then that when awakened she can take no damage while phasing, and that includes from special 3s, and you have the recipe for a very, very powerful champion. She does take a little bit of skill to get right, but when you can get her, she is very, very good. After her, we have Apocalypse in 9-8. Apocalypse is also a very versatile champion, but doesn't have the same sort of cheese potential that Kitty does. He can hit very, very hard, and he can also have his damage in multiple forms. He isn't just a big yellow numbers, he has poisons ticking away, he has degens ticking away, he has small amount of damage from bleeds, and he has the red damage on his specials, so you can get that damage in lots of different places, and that can be very helpful for avoiding nodes such as Rage, or not triggering a Safeguard. He also has a chunky health pool, which really lets him tank a lot of damage, and if you have him awakened, you can regen at the start of the fight, as long as you haven't used him in the previous one. It's a very weird signature ability, but it is one that's nice to have. Coming down to 9-6, we have Storm and Storm X. Storm, by herself, if you parry, heavy, get some crits, lots of prowess, big yellow numbers, and you can't really argue with the results. Lots of damage, can be basically used anywhere. If you do take her to be a horseman, which is not something considered on this tier list, but just for additional context, then she can actually become one of the hardest hitting DOT champions in the game, with her infinite shocks really, really hitting hard. Storm X, I would say, is slightly weaker, but not weaker enough to drop her down to 9-5. She can also hit extremely hard, but her shocks aren't really worth talking about. She also has different immunities, but they are both very good champions. Storm being slightly stronger than Storm X, both very good. In 9-5, we have Gambit and we have Sauron. Gambit has some good damage potential based on his prowess, and also has a very reliable stun on his special 1, as long as the opponent doesn't have an armor up. This allows him to cheese certain fights when necessary. Sauron actually hits harder than most people give him credit for, but he also has different forms of damage with his bleed and his degens, something to maybe look out for, but he's not the best mutant champion. Dropping down to 9-2, we have a rather sad state of Cable and both Cyclopses. Quick disclaimer that all 3 of them are significantly better if you can give them just a little bit of help. Cable needs the Apocalypse synergy and spam heavies, and the Cyclopses do sort of need a full team built around them, but they will hit very hard when you get them there. However, we are not considering that in this list. These 3 champions, there's not much more can be said, they are outdated and they are just plain bad. Jumping up to 8-8, we can look at some more decent champions, and we have Colossus, Omega Red, and Sunspot. Colossus is an absolute tank, he has amazing damage, and he also has lots of buffs, something that is relatively rare in the mutant class. Omega Red preferably wants that high sig, more sigs the better, and he can do so much damage in just a few hits, particularly if you're running double edge, and you can have that bleed right at the start of the fight. He can also deal with bleed and poison very, very well, and the bleeds just amp him up even further. His degen damage is excellent. Sunspot has very high burst damage potential from his special 2, but also his regular damage hits pretty hard if you can get those special 1s ramped up. His perfect block is also really, really helpful, getting you nice long parry openings, but also just reducing the incoming damage that you are taking. Dropping down to 8-6, we have Emma Frost. She has basically as many immunities as you could ask for in her diamond form, and overall she has very solid crits and special damage. In 8-4, we've got Mr. Sinister, Psylocke, and Sabretooth. Mr. Sinister really wants that high sig if you want to take him with you, and you are going to have to ramp him up throughout the quest. He's okay once you can get him going, but he has this very odd slow playstyle, which involves you charging your heavies for a long time while the opponent is stunned, but even then the payoff isn't that great. Psylocke can actually cheese a surprising amount of fights if you can get the opponents locked down, but unfortunately her damage is really lacking. You can permanently power lock them at 0 power, but once you get them there, it's still going to be a very long fight. Sabretooth, once ramped, hits really damn hard. Unfortunately, the ramp only lasts for a certain amount of fights, and that's RNG based at the start of the quest. If you can bring in the Sasquatch synergy, you will potentially be able to keep that going, but again, no synergies here. A real shame it just disappears, as he could be much better if this went away. Down in 8-3, we've got Deadpool X-Force. Even post-buff, he is still a bit meh. The bleed damage is fine, but you've got to do this really weird skipping thing to charge it up, and maybe someone out there really likes him, not the champion for me, not worth his odd playstyle. Moving over to 7-8, we have Professor X. Amazing damage when ramped, and you can ramp him both in a quest and throughout the fight. Those prowesses really build up, and he was one of the best champions for Abyss for soloing lots of fights. Amazing damage when ramped up, and is also an excellent miss counter. Above 25 charges, no miss. Very simple. On to 7-7, and we have Bishop, Domino, Havoc, and White Mags. Bishop has excellent special damage potential once you get those prowesses going, and the Incinerate off his Special 1 and Special 2 are very nice. He's a little bit light on some of the more modern utility, particularly utility that is common in the Mutant class, but he still has a bit going for him. The regens aren't the most potent when it comes to how much he can actually regen, but having access to them is nice, and his ability to cleanse off certain debuffs is very helpful. Domino is arguably the RNG queen of the game. She is either absolutely amazing or a bit of a flop. Assuming them a sort of rough average for her, she has very hard-hitting specials, and her critical bleeds can be very, very nasty. However, I can't put her any higher due to her unreliability. If Domino was always at her maximum potential, we would probably see her around the 9, or I probably couldn't put a 10, but certainly around the 9 level. She is very, very good. Havoc, excellent damage from Special 2, Special 3, and his heavy DOT. Having multiple different ways of getting your damage is a surprisingly underrated piece of utility, and Havoc comes with lots of them. Then we have White Mags. I would say arguably the weaker of the two mags, but potentially more versatile. He has great damage, and the degen should not be underrated. He is a quest ramp-up champion, which can be annoying if you only want to bring him for one fight, but he shouldn't be underestimated. He works much better than red mags for non-metal champions as well. He is perfectly viable for them. Dropping down to 7-5, we've got Toad and Wolverine X-23. Toad has some good damage and some okay poison damage when he gets going, and is a very good shrug counter as well, against anyone like Kingpin or Crossbones. X-23 doesn't hit the hardest, but her bleeds really help add on to that damage, and her regen is very good for keeping her going throughout a quest. However, she really suffers without the bleeds, and I am considering a potential demotion to 6-5 rather than 7-5, moving her one to the left. At 7-4, we have Old Man Logan, Platinum Pool, and OG Wolverine. Old Man Logan is okay, but it's slightly odd that you can only sort of have damage or regen until he gets going. He has lots of buffs, which is nice for the mutant class, but the damage is a little bit suffering. Platinum Pool is an absolute RNG fiesta. He can be okay, but it really depends on the cards he draws. In his best case scenario, he might be a 6, maybe a 7, but in his worst case scenario, he's a 1, an absolute flop. Next we have OG Wolverine. His regen is pretty good, though it does rely on his power bar, and he does preferably want to be awakened for his big regen. His bleeds are okay, but nothing to write home about. He is significantly better as a horseman, but we're not considering that here. Down into 7-3, we've got Captain Britain, Goldpool, and Nightcrawler. Captain Britain has okay damage, but she has to sacrifice all of her utility to get it. Placing debuffs on the opponent and then removing them for damage is a nice idea, but when you want those debuffs on the opponent, she hits like an absolute pool noodle. Goldpool is fine, he has okay damage and the regen is nice. A trophy champion really, nothing more to it. Nightcrawler is one of the most annoying champions to play simply because he can evade when you're trying to use him. He doesn't have that modern piece of evade champion utility, which is they don't evade when you parry or block. His damage is also a bit Down in 7-2, we've got Beast and OG Deadpool. Beast just isn't worth playing. I've seen a few things out of him, but really nothing is particularly impressive. OG Deadpool is really rocking the motto, regen doesn't kill people, and so you can't really put him any higher. He will survive a long time in a fight if you have him at a high rank, but unfortunately so will the opponent. Moving into column 6, coming down to 6-6, we have Wolverine Weapon X. He has very good bleeds, very good regen, if you can keep them going. He's a damage over time monster, but without those bleeds, he really suffers. In 6-5, we have Dani Moonstar. She has very good damage, and that passive Neuroshock is really helpful. Her SIG is a little bit niche, but is very helpful for shutting down anyone with cheat death mechanics or immortals, so Hercules gone, Nick Fury gone, and so on. She may get a promotion, depending on what I see out of her, but I don't see her played much, so it's hard to judge. Into column 5, and at 5-10, we have Archangel. Can you bleed it? Can you poison it? Yes? Oh, good. They aren't going to do anything for the entire fight and will take a hell of a lot of degen damage. Archangel is an excellent champion. At 5-5, we have Iceman, and this might be one of my greatest misplacings on this tier list to begin with. He has quadruple immunities, and all he really needs is for the opponent to not be immune to thermal effects. He is looking at a potential big promotion to 8-5. At 5-4, we have Jubilee. Her damage is okay, but I think a lot of people find her quite annoying to play with her firework cycling. She can do some good things, but is a bit clunky to play, and doesn't really have much utility to boot. Into column 4, we have Namor at 4-8. He has some very large damage from his specials and basic attacks once you get him going for a 2 or 4 Imperious Rex cycle. But his SIG provides absolutely unique utility, and that really can't be understated. You do need the very high and preferably max SIG on it, but it is very, very powerful. Up into column 3, and at 3-10, we have Red Mags. I'm sure you've all seen what he does at some point. Parry heavy, parry heavy, parry heavy, parry heavy, parry long heavy, parry long heavy, parry long heavy, and you can throw out just insane special 3s against most metal champions. He really cannot be understated how good just that much damage is that quickly into the fight is. On top of that, you've got minus 70% ability accuracy reduction and some pseudo-immunities. An excellent champion and one of the better buffs they've thrown out there. Down in 3-8, we have Strife. You really want to get him ramped up, but he has excellent damage when he is ramped up, and he can carry that throughout the whole quest. Lastly, we have Rogue in 1-7. Rogue Special 1 lets her steal buffs off the opponent, and as long as she can keep making contact with them, those stolen buffs are permanent on her, and her opponent can't gain them. In the right situation, where your opponent has lots of Furies and lots of prowess, she could throw out some truly insane numbers. So, there is your whistle-stop tour from what I think of the Mutant class. I'm generally pretty happy with where everyone has been placed, apart from Iceman, that's looking for a big promotion, and X-23 that might get a slight demotion. Coming up tomorrow, we'll have the Tech class, and then working through this week, we'll make sure we cover every single one before the week is out. If you have any questions, please do leave them below, and I will endeavour to answer as many as possible. Thank you, and I will see you next time.